Okay, good morning, everybody. And I'm going to start saying, welcome to this Shaping a Global Resilience Action Agenda with a focus on human settlements. And I have to start saying thanks for these brave speakers on a Friday morning on the last day of the COP. You've been really brave. And let's try to make this a smooth and a conversation among us about what is happening and what is needed to do in our regions and cities to truly enhance resilience and get our citizens ready and protected for the challenges we're going to face on the way forward. My name is Ramiro Fernandez. I'm Campaigns Director with the Climate Champions team. The high-level champions for climate action are appointed under the UNFCCC by the COP presidencies with the mandate to mobilize and accelerate climate action from cities, business, regions, financial institutions, and civil society all around the world. It was created in Paris, and since then, it's been expanding and growing and supporting the role that cities and investors and regions are doing around the world to commit to climate action and supporting national governments to reach the goals of the Paris Agreement. I'm going to be chairing this session today, and I'm very pleased to be with Monica Schroeder, Director of Global Advocacy at Build Change. Hello, Monica. Astrid is not here with us, sorry. Sam Asefa, Director of California's Governor Office of Land and Climate. And welcome, Sam. And Anshul Abbasi, I hope that's right, Policy Lead from the Climate Center for Cities in India. So it's very good. We're going to have diverse visions of all over the world here. I'm going to make you one brief round of questions to each of you, and then we'll go to second questions and we'll see how the dialogues evolve. Yes? Agree? Monica, I would like to start with you. I know that you're doing a lot of efforts at the national level to enhance policy and regulation around resilience in different parts of the world, but the recent progress made in Colombia and the Philippines. Could you tell us what is happening there and how the countries are strengthening resilience for the citizens?
Yeah, absolutely. So at Build Change, we have a vision that every home can be disaster resilient, and we advance this vision through a combination of actions and policy, finance, and technology. And so I'm really excited to talk about our policy work, which has been really gaining momentum over the last few years. We're celebrating a win in Colombia, where the government has issued, as of last year, the first set of guidelines, national level guidelines, on incrementally improving informal houses. It's a lot of words there. So what does that mean exactly? So we're working with houses that have been primarily self-built or built without the guidance of an engineer or an architect. And so these people living in these houses are living in vulnerability. Informality compounds existing risks. And so what the government has done with our advocacy support and with our technical assistance is to provide a set of guidelines on, okay, they're living in these informal houses. How do they get to a point where they are resilient? They're living in resilient homes. And so this is really a pathway to advance that. And in the Philippines, we're undertaking an advocacy campaign as well to advance a national framework for preventative home strengthening. So how does the government implement a program that not just responds to climate disasters and climate risks, but also builds a resilience framework so that people living in vulnerable houses can improve their houses before the next storm hits? And I think in the Philippines, this is particularly relevant. We've seen in the last month 6 major storms that have caused an immense amount of devastation. And so having that prevention framework and having this resilience agenda at the heart of policymaking is really critically important. And so I'm excited to, celebrate that win and build the momentum on what we're doing in the Philippines.
That's very good. Very interesting to see us And we had an informality session yesterday, and people were talking about the only informal about that informality sector is the way people is living. We need to recognize the dignity, and having governments stepping up and providing guidelines and supporting for them, I think is really good. I would like to go to India now, and Anshul, if possible. And I know you're working with city centers. People is amazed about the complexity of cities in India and the numbers that you manage in big cities there. So, and I know you've been working in this climate smart cities assessment framework. Can you tell us how cities are getting organized in India to drive resilience, please?
Thank you so much, first of all, for having me here. And Climate Center for Cities is the climate arm of the Ministry of Urban Development in India. And basically, it was established.
Of the Ministry of?
Urban Development. We call it as Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs. I hope I'm audible to all of you. So this was institutionalized in 2019 with a mandate to develop a climate ecosystem in India. So what was the issue and why we came into being is that there was a lot of piecemeal climate action which was happening across the country. By piecemeal, I mean that if there was a central assistance for a certain theme, for example, water conservation or water supply, solid waste management, it was more of a fund-based climate action which was happening across. There wasn't a need identified, and the ministry realized this, and then the whole mandate of the center is to develop this 360-degree climate ecosystem. By 360-degree climate ecosystem, what I mean is the first thing which you mentioned, the climate smart cities assessment framework. That becomes the heart of the center, which is, for example, if I go to a doctor and first thing I want to know is that what exactly is the problem, I go through an X-ray or an MRI. This framework is exactly the same for Indian cities. To check the climate readiness, we developed a framework across 5 themes, both mitigation and adaptation oriented. We have, from the mitigation point of view, urban planning, green cover, biodiversity, water management, and waste. Waste is kind of a sharing in both mitigation and adaptation. So 5 themes, 28 indicators, they turn down to 98 data points. 98 data points are the questions. These are various form of questions. These could be yes and no kind of questions, whether a city has a certain institutional mechanism or not. Then we also have the quantitative data points, like what is the electricity consumption, what is the fuel consumption. And then we float this out to the cities. In 2019, the first assessment, 96 cities participated. Then we had a big jump to 126 in the second. And the recent, as we said today, sometime back, we released the data of the last assessment. We had 226 cities participating. 226 cities is approximately like a little more than the 1/3 of the urban population in India, which is maybe equivalent to a population of multiple countries coming together. And the idea of the assessment was to democratize the data. So all the data which we have collected, we've put it out to open to public, for startups, to businesses, for academia to take it further. And so I'll not go much into the assessment now. This is one of the things we do to start with. Then the other parts of the climate ecosystem are the policies, capacity building, data and technology management, research and development. As a part of the policy, we supported the national government in developing 2 national level climate policies. I was fortunately a part of them. Long-term low-emission development strategy, that's a roadmap of India to go net zero by 2070. National Mission on Sustainable Habitat, that's towards meeting the NDCs by 2030. And all these 5 themes and the assessment is also the monitoring framework of the national policy, National Mission on Sustainable Habitat. So it was also tying these things together so that there is a regular monitoring and evaluation. Last thing, I'll just conclude regarding the assessment. We don't rank cities, we categorize cities from level 1 to level 5. Level 1, in all these indicators being very nascent cities. Level 5 are the ones who are very advanced. So level 2 is cities which have the required institutional mechanism in place. For example, a city biodiversity management committee, a green building cell. Level 3 is where cities have developed an action plan, a roadmap. For example, a climate action plan, clean air action plan. Level 4 is where they have allocated some fund. So till level 3, which means there is nothing into reality, it's all on paper. And level 5 is when cities have started monitoring and evaluating. So that's the our main job, and this leads us to all the pilot projects we do. On the basis of this data, we develop climate action plans for 4 cities that was steeping down into the city and doing a micro level plan. Yeah. Thank you so much.
That is very impressive. Very impressive. Thank you very much. So, doing a whole assessment to gathering data all across the country with many cities in the and then ranking them and monitoring the progress they are doing. And then, I would really like to get in detail about what are the impacts that you are seeing in detail in some of those countries and those who are in some of those cities when the fund is allocated and what is going. But very impressive of how to manage this complexity. Sam, I would like to go to you now, if possible. I think we all know California has been historically exposed to fires and impacts of climate. It's part of the ecosystem, I understand. But this has become much more extreme in recent years due to the impacts of climate change. And the fires are getting more extreme, droughts are getting more extremes. Please tell us how California is adapting itself to manage this complex context in the current situation.
Sure. First of all, thanks for having me here. You're right. I think what we have been experiencing has been sort of unprecedented. Just this year, every city in California broke records for extreme heat. That is happening at every level, from flood, extreme snow, extreme fire, extreme flood. California has been, prepared, and we're constantly adapting and changing. So, one, sort of at the high level, the state takes kind of all-of-government approach to respond to resiliency. So, we have the California Office of Emergency convenes and coordinates pretty much all state agencies. Agriculture, Department of Agriculture is just as important as Department of Housing, Natural Resources. So every agency is part of that coordination. And through that, we address resiliency relevant to the issues that you deal with. I'll take wildfire, for example. One of the challenges that we have is we have significant amount of wild land, but we also have an urban interface that is encroaching into those areas. So that interface makes it that much more impactful when we have fire. So a lot of our response to resiliency is both front end and back end. The front end is really developing resiliency actions in the built infrastructure based on the science and based on the data that we have from the previous fire or previous flood. So we write a wildfire technical assistance guidelines for residents and neighborhoods in terms of how to rebuild once a disaster happens, and or ahead of it, how to, what kind of plants should you plant? What should the distance be from your building? How should you home harden the buildings? Unlike the Philippines, significant, if not all, of the buildings are formal. They're approved by building code. They're designed to withstand earthquake, fire, everything. Well, but they're not prepared for the extremes that we are experiencing now. So as we learn from each condition, then the guidelines are then improved. And then once the disaster happens, you also have to consider, no matter what, people always want to come back. In a free society, you cannot, take the land and protect it and keep people away from them. So you really have to think about, if you're going to come back, how do you educate the public in terms of what resiliency means for that specific area? So we do a lot of work in educating the public. We have funding for different levels. One of the successful one that we recently implemented is community resilience centers. These are centers that people can go to during disaster. And those are really important, especially in rural areas, because you don't have access like urban areas where you could go for shelter or connection when power is out. So we're doing a lot of work in that. Neighborhood groups or communities can come and ask for grants to build new ones or upgrade existing resiliency centers. Those could be retrofitted with their own microgrid so that if the power is gone, you have a place to charge your phone and or any other energy needs. So there's a lot of work in that area. We also think about it. It's not just infrastructure resiliency; it's community resiliency as well. So we do a lot of work around education. I sit on the state's wildfire task force. It's made up of sort of multiple agencies and civic society that we help develop the framework for the state, but also engage at every corners of California to educate, engage citizens in terms of what kind of role they play as well, and then how should that inform state policies and investments. What we're experiencing now is we have to constantly upgrade the guidelines. What we thought was the right response 6 months ago, it's not anymore. Sometimes you have concurrent occurrences of flood, fire, and extreme heat. So the combinations are so extreme that you really have to rethink everything again in terms of how you respond. Extreme heat is one of the deadliest climate impacts, more than flood and fire, in fact, combined. So we lose a lot of people through that. So especially in the urban areas, we have a significant amount of public engagement where we go out using community-based organizations who work on the ground and understand the issues, be the messengers to go and educate and build that community resiliency so that they understand how to prepare, how to build back, and how to get state resources. They don't go out and talk about climate and greenhouse gas reduction. No, they talk about sort of what that means to your life on a day-to-day basis so that there is kind of reception to the issue.
Love it. Love the community resilience concept at the core of any sort of organization and getting prepared and adapting. And it really... I think it might be frustrating updating guidelines all the time. We're just not able to make it. We just need to update guidelines all the time. It's very impressive. I come from Patagonia, where we are exposed to fires sometimes as well, but I always impressed how you can manage this urban and how people live in the middle of places where get fired. For us, they were more isolated from that. It's in national parks and those areas. So really inspiring. And sadly, a lot of us, we're going to have to learn a lot from what you're doing in California and build community resilience all over, because this is going to grow all over the regions. Monica, let's go back to you and tell us, for Build Change, what is coming next? What are you organizing next and moving forward? We're going to build more into the future now.
Yeah, we're excited to keep expanding on this work and keep innovating as best we can. And so there are a couple of things that we're celebrating and that we're really excited about. To the director here's point about extreme heat, we've just launched our first extreme heat focused project in Indonesia. And that's really looking at what are the drivers of extreme heat in climate vulnerable communities and what can we do within the housing sector to mitigate those. So that has just been launched. They also announced at the COP, we're really excited that we are now going to be implementing 2 new projects in small island developing states, one in the Maldives and one in Comoros, having to do with resilient schools. Which is important not just for education, but also, for early warning. Schools are often a place where people go in the face of disasters for shelter, to really protect themselves. And so there's a number of benefits to having resilient schools. And the last one is really close to my heart. We have just started implementing a program in Urabá, Colombia, focusing on the integration of racial equity into housing considerations, particularly among Afro-Colombian populations. And so, this is something that has been on our minds for a really long time. How do we better integrate these questions of equity into housing? How do we drive policy forward that's going to be inclusive and forward-looking when it comes to questions of diversity and overall inclusion within a resilience framework? So that's what we're really excited about, and we're already looking forward to 2025 and what we can do next.
Great, thank you very much. Interesting, definitely equity and integrity has been at the core of these negotiations these last 2 weeks, and at every space matters. I don't know if you've seen Integrity Matters report and policy recommendations that came out earlier last week. There's a whole area and report from policy in vulnerability, equity, and fair share and justice that Elena Vinias is coordinating. Strongly encouraged to connect with that one.
We'll have to take a look.
Yes, please do. Highly recommend. And Anshul, let's go back to you. I said, want to learn more about what is happening in some of those cities. What are they doing when they have this action plan in place, and what are the aspiring actions? I heard about 4 cities, probably going to say wrong the names, like Le, Janangarh, Junagadh, and Pune. But you tell us, what are the most inspiring progress that you are seeing in cities in India going on?
Yeah, thank you for your question. I think climate action planning is a very new realization in terms of having a climate action plan for cities in India. We have around 20-25 cities which already have a plan, out of which 4 of them we as NIO have supported. So what we majorly did was we aligned these climate action plans to the national policy, National Mission on Sustainable Habitat. So that the idea was that Indian cities are already reporting to a framework. How do we support them? We train them that using this data, they can develop a climate action plan. As a pilot exercise, we chose these 4 cities. The reason being, Leh being a very small city with a population of 45 to 50,000 only, and it has a floating annual population of around 0.4 million. So that's the difference. Like it's almost the 10 times the tourist population which visits, and it's a cold desert. The temperature ranges from -40 to 15 degrees. Then there were 2 medium-sized cities, Junagadh and Jamnagar in Gujarat, and then we took 1 metropolitan level city, that's Pune, around a population of 6 million. What do CAPs talk about is that they have a detailed list of actions which will help these cities to go net zero. All our 4 cities have committed to go net zero way before the India's target of 2070. We have Leh wanting to achieve it by 2047, and the rest 3 of them by 2050. The mitigation measures help them detail out what action they need to take at multiple levels. The same thing of the framework, which I'll repeat: the institutional mechanisms, policies, regulatory frameworks, structural and non-structural measures. They're all quite detailed there. And in terms of adaptation as well. So what we do is we do a detailed hazard vulnerability risk assessment as a part of the climate action plan, which tells cities that what are the vulnerable areas in terms of the flooding, heat waves, what kind of materials, what kind of maybe even micro level design solutions are present there. And in one of the climate action plan, as a pilot, we also tried financing, because most important thing for our Indian cities is that they are maybe now aware of why they need to fight climate change, what measures they need to take, in what format. I think what is majorly missing is how and when. And then these climate action plans are a way for them to understand that what they need to do. So maybe we have around 4,000 ULBs, and there would be few measures. For example, retrofitting of municipal buildings, having energy efficient municipal systems, shifting to EV buses, having charging stations, NMT network. These are common across all cities. But what is the right time for them to implement and using what funds is what they need to understand, and that's where the role of the state government and the national government comes in. To do the same, we are developing these climate action plans for them. In addition to this, we also realize that because of disasters, the climate-induced disasters, a lot of damage is happening. So the fund which is available for climate action, a certain portion of it goes into mitigating, recovering from these disasters. So we are developing guidelines for climate and disaster-proof master plans. I think if at the planning level itself, we bring in these climate and disaster entry points, a lot of loss and damage, a lot of mitigation, a lot of emissions get saved right at the front itself. The second thing we are doing it for the ministry is for all the new schemes, programs and missions, how the climate as well as disaster entry points be included right at the project formulation stage, so that the area where the development of the infrastructure happens is not maybe flood prone. So those kind of actions we have, these are our learnings from the 4 climate action plans, and that is how we are taking it ahead. Apart from that, we also do a lot of capacity building of city officials. But I think what's lacking and we look forward to is building the financial capacity of Indian cities. Thank you so much.
That is clear. And I have to say that I encourage to build on the experience from California and keep those guidelines. Don't even print them. Don't even print them, because we're going to have to change it soon, unfortunately. I remember, I don't know if any of you have read the Ministry of the Future book that starts with a chapter on extreme heat in India, and it's devastating. And you all both said, extreme heat is coming. India is really exposed. It's already happening. So we need to adapt and prepare, have the guidelines, updating, and build community resilience, because this capacity building that you're doing, I think, is massive and very important there. But let me go back to Sam and ask Sam, I have to say that your state is probably one of the main reasons of hope for all of us around the world, at least for the next 4 years. We are counting on you so much, and I'm seeing this California is all in that you have there. So please give us a sense of hope why the 6th economy of the world is going to keep the US acting on climate for the future.
First, let me correct you. 5th largest economy.
I'm sorry about that. I'm so glad to hear that. May you improve recently.
Well, your point is well taken. So regardless of the oscillations in politics, California has always, through Republican governors, Democrat governors, over the decades, has really completely been in around climate change. My office was created by then Governor Ronald Reagan, a Republican. It was created after he signed the most stringent environmental law in the country, the California Environmental Quality Act, 1968. So a Republican created and signed the bill. So the history of California in terms of leadership doesn't waver around climate. And your point is well taken. Yes, we are in that oscillation now, but we've been there before, 2016. And we're even much prepared now in multiple fronts. So I'll just point a couple. Domestically, internally within the US and within California, we've always had Plan A, Plan B. And what the work that has been done for decades in terms of adaptation, resiliency, community infrastructure and knowledge, even though there is still denialism within California, it's a diverse city, but the prevailing sentiment is that science informs us. We believe in science, and people understand that. So there is no wavering in terms of how much commitment we will continue to do on climate. Just this year, under a huge budget deficit, the governor and legislatures put $17 billion for our climate work. In terms of within the U.S., we have alliances. California was, one of the U.S. Climate Alliance initiators, and we're part of, we represent about 55% of the population and 60% of the U.S. economy. So we will continue to work with them to really continue to advance climate issues internationally, and that's part of why myself and my colleagues have been here to say we'll continue, but we'll double down on our engagement with sub-national under two coalition, which California co-sponsored when it was created, the largest coalition of network of subnationals in the world. So we'll continue to have that partnership. Just last year, the governor met with Xi Jinping, and out of that signed 5 memorandum of understandings. Here, the second and the 5th largest economies in the world saying we're going to work together to address mitigating climate change. So that has a lot of impact. So California is in, and we're here to continue to work. The federal policies will come and change, but we have significant leverage, but we have to do it because we can as well. And it's our responsibility to continue to advance the cause, and we're also preparing, to mitigate anything that comes at us from politically, sort of in the domestically. But rest assured, we'll continue to engage, if not more.
Yeah, I'm sure it's going to be more. Thanks for that. And I have to say, I've been working in this space of bringing in subnational governments and cities closer to the multilateral space and international space for 10 years now. And for me, the reaction of the U.S. alliances with the We Are Still Ill alliance that you set up as California with others back in 2016 was the best proof of how effective is the strategy to strengthen climate action among different actors there. And I'm totally convinced this is going to happen again. As you said, we are more prepared. We know what we're going through. And I don't know how it's been for you these 2 weeks, but I came to this COP really worried that the result of the US election was going to create a doom and gloom and pessimism. And that's not what I've been hearing these 2 weeks. People still working, they're getting ready, and they said, we're going to keep on working on this regardless of what is happening. We're going to move on, and we're going to address this crisis together. So thanks for that, and looking forward to see you next year and the year after with more commitments and actions on climate.
We'll be there.
That's very good. Thank you very much. With that, I will like to thank the three of you for this dynamic and rich interaction. I think we learn a lot from very different perspectives, and you have a lot to learn among yourselves. And I would like to give Monica to you to give your final remarks and the closing of the event, if you agree on that. Yeah? Oh, yes, please. Can we?
Yeah, absolutely. We
We'd
have
love
time.
to have a question from the audience.
Question is for Monica.
Please.
Not to drag this out, but I really want to hear from you.
Would love to.
I wrote my question for Monica. It's a little long, so bear with me. And I'm coming from the California context, and I know you have a little bit of experience in California. Okay, so how can policymakers effectively balance the urgency of accelerating housing production with the need to ensure that new developments are climate resilient? And I ask this in terms of particular risk to wildfires, flooding, sea level rise, especially in the context with California, where we have kind of strict environmental review laws. So how can we kind of streamline the processes while also, ensuring that there's community engagement, that there's effective stakeholder engagement, and that they're meeting kind of proper environmental reviews?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. Thank you for that. And I would actually maybe flip the question a little bit and urge complementing new development with a real vested interest in retrofitting housing for structural resilience. So we all know that there are needs for new housing, not enough housing. There is fundamentally a quantitative housing deficit, right? But at the same time, retrofitting for resilience hasn't been a priority for a lot of governments, and it has so many benefits. And so I think that's that's one thing that we really need to be looking at in a really targeted way. When you retrofit, not only save costs, we found, Build Change did a study a few years ago on the cost of improving existing housing, and we found that I believe it's about 20% of the cost of building new in the same location. So that's a huge cost. That lets the resources go a lot further. There's also a consideration when it comes to a mitigation, argument that there is, we can save embodied carbon if we retrofit as compared to building new. We did some work last year on reviewing all of Build Change's existing projects to date, and we found that it's you can save 2/3 of the embodied carbon by retrofitting for resilience compared to building new, and it also saves time. I mean, like when we're a lot of these developments have so many steps in order to actually get to completion and actually deliver housing for people, whereas when you retrofit, especially when you're engaging homeowners in the process, they can make the decisions around, what materials are they using, where are they, engaging the local workforce. And so they have a vested interest in getting this done quickly because they want to live in resilient homes. And so you really have to look at the demand side of it as well and figure out, how do we advance this? And for us, that's retrofitting. So that's, to us, that is like the big shining solution that not enough people are looking at quite yet.
I completely agree with you in terms of how that has not gotten enough attention, but it has to now, not only because of climate change, but right after COVID, that is top of mind now for many cities in America, including San Francisco, with significant amount of vacancies of the way the workforce, the work habit is changing. We have significant amount of vacant buildings. So we have to be really creative, not only to retrofit it for housing, but other uses as well. So that kind of thinking, what I know from the student of cities is disasters like this, as horrible as they are, that's when innovation comes, and that's when transformations happen because of the challenges. So we're in those times now. So retrofit, that needs to be sort of lifted up, and more attention should be paid to that. So I really appreciate that
Thank
point.
you.
What a great closing of this panel, Sam. As you said, difficult times create new innovations and new opportunities. We're going to go through very difficult times. So let's start thinking about new approaches and new ways of doing things, because we need that type of radical transformation to deal with the challenge we're facing. Monica, any other question from the audience? Okay, that's great. Thanks for that. Thanks also for the audience. Very brave, active this morning. Super good. So let's close this panel there for you and give Monica the closing remarks of this day today.
Thank you so much, Rama. I'm actually going to go to the podium so that you have the benefit of seeing my slides without my head in the way. You're welcome to stay here if you'd like.
No, but you're not going to be able to see.
I'll be giving just a few slides.
Yeah, let's go there so we see.
And hopefully you can see me despite my height challenged, stature. All right. Are you able to hear me okay on the mic? Great. So I'm happy to talk a little bit today about a campaign that we have been developing, the Housing SDG campaign. So as you know, we have this vision where every house can be disaster resilient. And we've made over 1.4 million people safer and are celebrating our 20th year of impact. We've been able to elevate this platform even more with the support of Race to Resilience. So we are really happy to have been a part of this initiative from the very beginning, and have had the space with the Race to Resilience to drive advocacy and action forward for those living in vulnerable housing. So like I said, we're here today to talk about the Housing SDG campaign. But this campaign is also meant to be a conversation. We think that housing needs to be its own SDG. That's what we're advocating for. But there's no right answer. You know, so I encourage you to, reflect on this question as I give just a few thoughts and critically analyze and bring your own thinking to us, because we want to engage with you on this conversation and really build the future of this campaign. So I am going to ask for the next slide just to talk a little bit about some of the reflections that I have on the housing campaign. And while they're getting those loaded, I want to talk about a few things. Why housing? Why should housing be its own SDG? And what tangible improvements can be made to the SDG framework to better address housing needs? So globally, 3 billion people are estimated to live in inadequate housing by 2030. Doesn't even come close to the goal that SDG 11, the Sustainable Cities and Communities SDG, sets out, ensuring access for all to adequate, safe, affordable housing and upgrading slums and basic services by 2030. So we have 17 SDGs. We have 168 targets. Of those 168 targets, only one relates to housing, if you can believe that. And yet, 15 of the 17 SDGs are directly impacted by housing. So, for example, SDG 13, climate action. A study we published last year demonstrated that improving existing housing can save 4.8 gigatons of CO2 emissions. That is 4.6 billion metric tons. That can make a huge difference in carbon mitigation, but it's also climate adaptation. Resilient housing can provide shelter and safety against climate impacts for those most vulnerable. Or if we look at SDG 8, decent work and economic growth. Access to adequate housing in informal settlements can generate as much as 10.5% growth as measured by GDP. It can create jobs at the local level. On average, 5 jobs are created per housing unit built. And add to that jobs created by massive housing improvements, and you have huge workforce development opportunities. Or SDG 5, gender equality. Housing contributes to better education of women and girls, better health, better safety. Women and children are 14 times more likely to die in a disaster than men, which is a staggering statistic. It provides access to wealth accumulation. In our program in the Philippines, we work with primarily women clients who are accessing loan products for resilient housing. And they are effective stewards of their family's assets. They repay loans reliably, and they're building their credit more reliably than men, I would add. So, it's an incredible opportunity to really advance gender equity. The urban SDG covers way too broad of a mandate. It covers cities, urbanization, transportation, and housing simply gets lost in the mix. And yet, it is a cornerstone to sustainable development. Could I get the next slide, please? It provides access to basic needs from light, power, water, sanitation, but also, to the California example, protection against fire, wind, earthquakes, heat. And it has growth and development opportunities. It's an asset, it's a workspace, it's a place to study and learn. And homes generally represent between 50 and 90% of a family's wealth. Housing is a human right, and yet we don't talk about it enough, and we certainly don't fund it enough. There is a $3 to $4 trillion investment gap to ensure adequate housing for all. So we need a better way to capture how housing has had a transformative impact on so many development outcomes. And for us, this means creating an SDG in the post-2030 agenda that focuses explicitly on housing. So what can we do about it? We have a few ideas. First, whatever this SDG looks like, it needs to draw awareness to the qualitative housing deficit alongside the quantitative one. There isn't enough attention on the inadequate quality of housing. We all know that there are not enough housing units in the world, and yet not as much attention is paid to the quality of those housing units. But 268 million households live in inadequate housing, and more global efforts need to be directed towards improving their living conditions. Additionally, the current SDG framework has no stipulations for rural housing because it falls under the sustainable cities and communities, the urban SDG. There's rural housing needs get lost in the mix. This is a big oversight. We all know that urban populations are increasing, but we can't forget that 43% of people live in rural settings, and over 100 million people worldwide are experiencing homelessness, another aspect that gets lost in this framework. The narrative around displacement is overall weak when it comes to housing, and all of these items, both the rural housing needs and homelessness, need to be addressed more explicitly in a framework. And then last, we are calling for broadening definitions of slums, informal settlements, and inadequate housing. The definitions in the current framework are nebulous at best. They're 20 years old, and they depend on national statistics and census authorities, which often don't have the capacity to take on these kinds of exercises. So addressing housing would drive additional resources towards capacity building and increasing available data in an already data-poor environment. We don't have enough housing, or we don't have enough data on informal housing and on informality in general. So if I could get the last slide, this is why we think housing needs to be its own SDG. We published a white paper just a few months ago on why we think this is, outlining some of our thinking. And we invite you to learn about the campaign, to join us, and most importantly, engage with us on this critical issue. It's only through the conversations that we're having here at the COP and elsewhere that we can drive an agenda forward for resilience. So thank you so much, and I'll pass it back to Rama.